Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're on a mission to untangle two incredibly important, heavily interconnected, but fundamentally different economic terms: economic growth and economic development. If you've ever paid attention to the news or listened to a political debate, you have definitely heard these phrases thrown around. But actually understanding the specific difference between them, that changes absolutely everything about how we view a nation's success. It literally changes how governments write policies, how we measure human progress, and how global organizations distribute aid. Think about that for a second. Is making more money the exact same thing as living a better life? We constantly hear politicians and pundits fall into the ultimate synonym trap. They use growth and development interchangeably almost every single day. They'll celebrate a growing economy as if it automatically guarantees a better life for every single citizen in that country. But as we're going to see today, confusing a larger national bank account with overall societal health and happiness is a massive oversight, and it completely distorts our understanding of actual progress. Okay, let's dive into this. Growth and development, they are absolutely not synonyms. When we treat these concepts as identical, we hide the real story of how a nation truly thrives. It's exactly like looking at a person's massive salary and just assuming you automatically know everything about their physical health, the quality of their education, and their daily happiness. Conflating the two completely masks the underlying realities of a society. To truly understand what's actually happening in a country, we have to separate the strict math from the human impact. So let's establish our baseline. What exactly is economic growth? Well, based on our source material, it simply refers to the increment in the amount of goods and services produced by an economy. And really, that's it. It's measured over a certain time period, usually year over year, and we're looking strictly at an aggregate output. Did we make more stuff this year than we did last year? Did the per capita income rise higher than the price levels? In other words, did people actually get wealthier on paper, or did inflation just make things more expensive? It's a purely quantitative increment, straightforward mathematics based entirely on production volume. And when you look at growth in practice, notice how the focus is intensely on the income of the people and the overall financial output of the nation. Now, growth allows people to theoretically enjoy more goods and services, and let's be clear, it is completely necessary for nations with growing populations to sustain themselves. But notice the key characteristic here. It's entirely single-dimensional. It only looks at the quantitative aspect of income, production, and output. It does not measure how that income is distributed or what it's actually being used for. It's all about that single dimension. Think of economic growth as a simple, expanding factory output box. You check the factory at the end of the year, and hey, if there are more boxes coming off the assembly line than last year, you've successfully achieved growth. The math checks out. But that single dimension completely ignores the broader human impacts. It doesn't tell us if the factory workers are paid fairly. It doesn't tell us if the factory is polluting the local water supply. It ignores whether the workers have access to basic health care, and it certainly doesn't tell us if the surrounding town is actually thriving. It just counts the boxes. Now, what's really interesting here is how we pivot to a much broader, qualitative lens. Economic development is defined not just by output, but as a measurable improvement in the quality of life and the living standards of the people. We are finally stepping out of the factory and into the real world. We're moving away from a purely quantitative measurement, simply counting those boxes, to a multidimensional, qualitative assessment of human existence and societal health. This is where we measure the actual impact that money has on everyday citizens. So instead of that expanding factory, I want you to picture a vibrant, flourishing community. Because development means we are seeing multi-dimensional changes in actual living conditions. It means a measurable reduction and even elimination of poverty, ensuring people have their basic needs met daily. It means tackling chronic unemployment so families have true security. It means actively decreasing that crushing inequality between the richest and the poorest. It even involves progressive changes in social structures, attitudes, and institutions. It's a whole societal transformation. Better health facilities, higher literacy rates, and genuine human capital improvement. So the crucial point really boils down to a simple equation. Economic development equals economic growth plus the standard of living. Development encompasses the holistic well-being of a nation's people. This means that economic growth is absolutely necessary, right? You simply can't develop without the resources, the capital, and the income that growth provides. But growth alone, not sufficient. You have to take that quantitative growth, the extra money and resources, and successfully translate it into a higher qualitative standard of living for the entire population. Let's pit these two concepts head to head to firmly establish this journey from simple math to comprehensive human impact. Economic growth is a narrow concept. It's single-dimensional, focusing strictly on quantitative data like GDP and national income. On the other side, economic development is a broad concept. It takes that quantitative data and pairs it with qualitative changes across multiple dimensions, like health, education, and equality. Growth asks a very simple question: how much did we make? Development, on the other hand, asks a much deeper question: how well are we living, and is that wealth actually benefiting society as a whole? Let's systematically break down these differences and see how this builds. The meaning and scope align perfectly with what we've discussed: an increase in goods versus a genuine improvement in life, a narrow focus versus a broad one. But I really want you to focus on the dependency between the two. Economic growth can occur entirely without economic development. Imagine a country that discovers massive oil reserves. Its GDP could skyrocket overnight. That is massive economic growth. But if all that oil money stays at the top and doesn't build public schools or hospitals or reliable roads, there is zero economic development. That said, economic development is only possible with economic growth. You can't improve the infrastructure and health of a nation without the underlying economic engine generating the wealth to actually fund it. I actually want to slow down for a second just to really let this thought from the source materials sink in. Development concerns not only man's material needs, but also the improvement of social conditions of his life. That hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It highlights the true humanistic authority of economics. Real progress isn't just about stacking up material wealth in a treasury. It fundamentally requires institutional, cultural, and social improvements. If the social conditions remain stagnant or even deteriorate, no amount of material wealth can compensate for that lack of true development. So to summarize the ultimate relationship between these two terms, economic growth is a prerequisite to economic development. Think of growth as the mathematical engine of a vehicle. You absolutely need that engine running, generating power and wealth, just to move forward. But holistic economic development, that's the actual destination. You can rev the engine all day long, producing massive GDP numbers and breaking output records. But if you aren't steering those resources toward public health, education, and social equity, you are never going to arrive at a developed society. So, I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. When you look at the policies being debated around you on the news, ask yourself, is your country just expanding its factory, obsessing over a single-dimensional increase in goods and top-level wealth? Or is it actively building a flourishing community, using that economic growth to eliminate poverty and elevate the multidimensional quality of life for absolutely everyone? Understanding this fundamental difference between growth and development is your key to answering that question. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.